Since the disastrous episode of the Pixies, Professor Lockhart had not brought live creatures to class. Instead, he read passages from his books to them, and sometimes reenacted some of the more dramatic bits.
The Belated Binge Podcast.
Hi, and welcome to the Belated Binge Podcast. I'm Zach, your host, revisiting some of the most iconic series in recent memory that I was incredibly late on, like our current binge of Harry Potter, where, despite being the same age as Movie Harry, I didn't read this series through till my mid-20s. That's the belated part. Now, we're going back a chapter or two at a time, picking it apart, deep diving what's on the page, speculating about what isn't, particularly Dumbledore's role in his master plan. What did he know? When did he know it? And the motivations guiding the story, and, of course, infusing as much sarcasm as humanly possible. That's the binge part. Together, they make the belated binge, and today we continue our reread of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets with Chapter 10, The Rogue Bludger. But before we get into it, this podcast will have spoilers. This series wrapped up in 2007, so if you haven't read them by now, you're even later than I was. This podcast will also have some adult language. You can buy them in the kids section at the bookstore, but I didn't read them until I was a grown-ass man. Patron shout-out, our free elf, Alex Sweatley. Alex became a patron right before the last episode dropped and isn't on social media. So, to replace the social media shout-out that is part of that tier, here's a plug for Miracle League of Lake County, which Alex and her boyfriend are coaches for the Cubs team. Miracle League is a national organization, all-inclusive baseball program. And as somebody who grew up playing baseball, I am 100% in favor and behind it. Special announcements. I mentioned this in the last episode, but I'll be joined by the hosts of For Fawkes Sake to cover Chapter 11, The Dueling Club, in the next episode of this podcast. They have a book-to-movie compare and contrast podcast, and honestly, I've been trying to book them since I started this thing, so I'm pretty stoked about it. But we're not there yet. So, in case you're obliviated or you got your Hogwarts letter late, let's shove our faces into that white liquidy substance of our pensive. Last chapter, number 9, The Writing on the Wall, was pretty dark. Filch wanted to physically assault a 12-year-old Harry while blaming him for petrifying his cat, which was just the beginning for Harry, who had Snape trying to get him kicked off the Quidditch team, Justin Finch-Fletchley ghosting him in the hallway, and Colin Creevy informing him that the rumor around school is that he's the heir of Slytherin. This coming on the heels of Professor Binns recounting the legend to Harry's class in History and Magic, and apparently it spread to the rest of the school in about 5 minutes. Before we can move on to this week's chapter, we need to close the book on the last chapter and recap our
Expecto. Plot change-o.
This is the part of the show where we theorize on what we could expect to change in our story if we made one small adjustment to the plot of the chapter we're covering. In the last chapter, I asked, what if Mrs. Norris wasn't petrified? What if she was actually killed? How would that change our chapter? How would that change the story? Accio Crucio and I went back and forth on this on TikTok, where they suggested without Mrs. Norris, Filch would just have to get another cat, to which I responded with a fun plot twist that Filch would possibly get Crookshanks before Hermione could. And their response was that this was highly unlikely given that nobody wanted Crookshanks, which is sad, but also very true. Side note, where do you land on the theory that's out there floating in the abyss that Crookshanks was actually the Potter's cat, and Hermione getting Crookshanks was kind of a full circle moment? And also why Crookshanks got along so well with Sirius in dog form. They actually knew each other, and we're not going to go off the rails with that. But anyway, back to the question that I asked. From my perspective, this obviously makes the scene a lot darker. Filch is going to completely spiral to the point that I wouldn't be surprised if Dumbledore removed him, assuming he's not a poltergeist and is actually removable. Go back to last episode for more on that poltergeist theory. Because he was nearly physical with a student when he thought Mrs. Norris was killed, he's not going to let it go if she actually is killed. On top of that, the reaction of the school, both student and faculty, is probably more severe, right? Now, I don't want this to be taken incredibly harshly, but I don't think the school's going to shut down just yet. This is a cat, after all. However, last time the chamber was open, Moaning Myrtle was murdered. So I think they would probably launch more into that like lockdown mode with the escorts to class and the whole 9 yards with that from the jump, just immediately after finding the dead cat. I also think that Harry would have an even harder time with the rumors that started circulating. And if security's ramped up from the jump, I don't know, does Hermione get petrified? That's the moment that the school actually started to come around on Harry not being the heir of Slytherin because she's one of his best friends. And if that doesn't actually happen, do they ever come around? And what about Ginny? If they ramp up security right away, is she able to sneak around under Tom Riddle's influence? Does she still get locked in the chamber and need rescued later on? Or is she sort of just stuck in her room? Still using the diary, I assume, but it almost seems like if worse happened to Mrs. Norris in the beginning, maybe it's not that far of a stretch to think the students who became victims of petrification might have actually been saved because the threat may have been taken more seriously from the beginning. However, this is Hogwarts, and this is a story about a child hero. And if the adults do their job in these books, there would be no book. So everything I just said is probably bullshit, and the events would probably go down the exact same way, except with one less cat in the world and an even worse Filch. So, on that very, very happy note, we have wrapped up our conversation from the last chapter. So, this week's Expecto Plot Changeo question from Chapter 10 of Chamber of Secrets is, what if Lockhart wasn't so useless and didn't remove all the bones in Harry's arm? What if it was mended properly? How could that have changed the events of the Rogue Bludger chapter? And what about the rest of this book or the series? Let me know your thoughts to be included in the next episode of the podcast. You can do so here or on my website, belatedbinge.com. That video that I just took will be shared across social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can respond with your thoughts on any of those platforms or as a voicemail on my website, belatedbinge.com. And with that, we shall dive into the events of this week's chapter with
Priority. Incon chapter.
We've reached the point where our wands connect. Not the tips, just the streams, so we can recap what went down in the chapter we just read. This week, Chapter 10 of Chamber of Secrets, the Rogue Bludger, starts with our favorite subject in this entire book. The complete incompetence of one Gilderoy Lockhart. And since he's already shown a glimpse of his true colors with the pixie incident earlier in this book, he doesn't dare fail in flying colors in front of the students again, does he? At least not in the classroom with animals or beasts or whatever you call a pixie. These students that he portrays himself as larger than life, celebrity status, high almighty wizard man, better not see him fail again. They might just catch on to your bullshit. And now he's reading his own books and acting them out, with Harry apparently co-starring in his supposed reenactments, and now he's giving homework to the students to write poetry about him and his books. So that's fun. And this is where our little trio are about to put their plan in motion. They need a teacher's signature to get into the restricted section of the library. And they've got their mark. And Hermione delivers. Who knew a pompous, egotistical narcissist just needed to hear that you liked his book and would sign anything that you put in front of him without even reading it? After a quick compliment to Hermione, he turns his sights on Harry, and we start to cringe again. He's doing that thing where he's trying to prove that he's better and more accomplished than a 12-year-old kid. This time it's about Quidditch, letting Harry know how great of a seeker he really was and that he'd be happy to help less able players such as himself. And this is where we collectively curse in frustration. Choose your favorite word, okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Fuck. Feel better? Me either. And now we're off for the library to utilize our newly acquired permission slip. And Hermione's trying to keep the autograph, and we're reminded she still has her crush on Lockhart. This time we groan together. 1, 2, 3. Last time. Maybe. So now we're reading about Polyjuice Potion, and that's just wonderful, because this is one of the biggest moments of the series. This is the brick that lays the foundation for, roughly 80% of the remaining plot. It's Polyjuice Potion. Polyjuice Potion. It's about to be used more than wands from here on out. I'd like to say that I'm exaggerating, but I'm not sure that I am. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on what Polyjuice Potion is supposed to do, because, well, I'll have plenty to say about that down the road in one of those 1,286 times that it's going to come back up. Probably the one here in a couple chapters is where we'll get into it the most. But Hermione's going to go through the ingredients list, and she's talking about how hard it's going to be to get those ingredients and to make the potion in general. Says that she's never seen one more complicated, and Ron gets quite put off by the part where they need, and I quote, a bit of who they're turning into. What does it say about Ron that he immediately went to toenails? And what does it say about me that I think that would probably be my exact reaction too? It's gross. It's just gross. And Hermione's reaction is actually pretty hilarious. She slams the book shut, calls he and Harry basically chicken shits, because what I failed to mention a second ago is that Harry starts piping up with concerns about getting the ingredients. And, what are we going to do, rob Snape? That might come up later, but Hermione's not having it. She's just not. And in her reaction to the two of them being, let's call it trepidatious at best, at this plan that she's sort of started to kind of cook up in her head, two things really stand out. One, you can see in the description how personal this is for her, unlike what we've seen in this book until this point. She says that she doesn't want to break rules, but thinks that threatening Muggleborns is way worse than making a hard potion. Hermione is Muggleborn. She feels like this is quite literally the only way to possibly save herself from becoming a victim, because she knows she's a target. And that's bold. It's empowering, and it's an early glimpse of how really ultimately how Hermione the badass, who kind of develops her own code of right and wrong. It's this foundation that we really kind of started in the last book, but we're building upon it some more now. She's gonna do anything that she has to uphold. What am I trying to say? To uphold that code. She's awesome. That being said, the second thing that stands out to me is it's some bullshit. And by that, I mean the way that she emphasizes not wanting to break the rules in this passage. It's a thread that gets pulled, I think, way too often in this series. Hermione, the rule follower, and we're just supposed to be surprised every time she breaks the rules. But this hasn't held up since, like, the Midnight Duel chapter in Sorcerer's Stone. She's broken so many rules already, and more just to get to this book. And for them, quite literally, book inside the book, to get the book that she's reading to them with the potion in it, she had to break rules. Like, she's always breaking rules. And as I've said before, she does it for reasons that she feels are justified, but she still breaks rules all the damn time. So, I don't know. I cringe a little bit because it's going to come up multiple times from here on out. The one that really stands out, and this is in particular the movie, how it's depicted in Order of the Phoenix when they're coming across the bridge right after their first Dumbledore's army thing, and they do this thing where she's like, it's kind of exciting, isn't it? Breaking the rules, and who are you, and what have you done with Hermione? That nonsense. Like, they've been breaking rules since day one. She's been breaking rules since day one. It's a dumb thread. That's all. Tangent aside, the boys are down, of course, and we learn that it's going to take a month to make this potion, which isn't great, because as Ron puts it quite eloquently, Malfoy could attack half the Muggleborns in the school by then. And Hermione responds with this being the best plan they've got, so full steam ahead, she says. Is this really the best plan, though? Or even a good one? Let's save that for the Lumos segment. Right now, it's time for Quidditch. Of course it is. I've said this 100 times already on this podcast. Quidditch never matters for the match, but it always matters to serve the plot, and this is no different. As soon as this one starts, we get a sense of why, because Harry is immediately dodging a bludger, and despite George hitting it away, it just keeps coming back for Harry's head like a live, sentient, angry boomerang, I guess. At this point, it's pretty obvious that there's some kind of wonky shit going on here. And during a timeout, Harry convinces the rest of the team to let him dodge the bludger without any help from the beaters, because apparently Fred and George have been flanking him, hitting this one bludger away the entire match. And so this part doesn't make sense to me. And maybe it's just logic getting the best of me, or maybe if this happened, we would be less likely to move the plot forward the way that it is intended for the book. But why not have one Weasley with Harry hitting that one bludger away from Harry repeatedly, whatever form of that word that you would like to use here, and then the other Weasley go down and serve the rest of the team, because there's only one bludger to worry about for them. I know this is supposed to be heroic by Harry or whatever, but it's just dumb. And I guess we need it, because if we don't have that, him, dancing around the bludger, we don't have this wonderful Malfoy line, so that he can say the whole "training for the ballet, Potter," all that thing, because it's fire, right? It's uber dope, yo. I don't know. I'm not hip. And Harry had to have this happen. We needed the Draco jeering because Harry had to see the snitch right above Draco's head while Draco only has eyes for Harry. And bam! Bludger got him. Broken arm. Maybe if these two weren't so infatuated with each other in this moment, he would have remembered that there's a Bludger trying to kill him. But now, in a fog of extreme pain, he just dives at Malfoy, who flies away terrified because he still doesn't realize that the snitch is right by his head, and Harry catches the snitch, gets down to the ground, and passes out. When he comes around, he's surrounded by his teammates. And this is where the chapter kind of falls apart for me. Apparently, the only adult around is Lockhart, and Harry specifically says, "Don't do shit to me, take me to the hospital wing." And this grown-ass man says, "No, I'm going to force my magic on you even though I know damn good and well I'm a fraud and I don't know how to do what I'm pretending that I do." It's a shitty plot line, honestly. Whatever. We know what happens next. He removes all the bones in Harry's arm and then sends him to the hospital wing where Harry asked to go in the first damn place and should have already been. And I have a lot to say about this, so I'm going to go somewhat rapid fire here. 1, why is the nurse not at the matches where kids are always getting hurt? In sports, there are always some sort of training staff or people who are trained in some form or fashion to deal with sports injuries. Now, not every single thing is in everybody's tool belt, but just to coach youth sports, you have to go through certain first aid training. Hogwarts? Nope. A kid could literally fall off their broom for 30 feet and have to walk to the castle for medical attention. Explain that to me, please. And later on, Madame Pomfrey is complaining. I believe the text says, dangerous games that are always hurting children and inept teachers is what she's complaining about. That's a paraphrasing, of course. But she knows kids are always getting hurt at these things. Why is she not just there? Anyway. 2, why is Lockhart the only teacher here? Everyone saw Harry fall. He's been unconscious, at least for some passage of time. How long? I have no idea. No other staff member at this game thought it worth their time and energy to tend to the kid who just passed out on the ground? It's not like the match is still going on. It's not like they didn't see it. He literally won them the game. He was the center of attention. Everyone knew. Everyone saw. Apparently nobody cared. At the very least, Madam Hooch should be here and trained to treat sports injuries. I'm just saying. And then this whole bit that we have to deal with Lockhart being just so eager to prove that he can't do magic doesn't really make any sense. If you're a sheep in wolf's clothing, you don't jump to the center of the pack and try to howl when you know damn well you can't fucking do it. And if this shit really happened, Lockhart should be fired immediately for not just being completely inept at magic, but literally performing magic on a child who expressed multiple times with witnesses that he didn't want you to do it. Is there no rule that unless there are extenuating circumstances, teachers cannot perform magic on a child who does not consent to it? I mean, look, there are obvious times when you have to do magic to help or save a student from a bad situation, or if a student is attacking someone, you got to do what you got to do. But this isn't that. This is a child saying, "No, don't do this to me. I want to be treated medically by a qualified person." And this adult says, "Nope, I'm gonna fuck you up with magic." This is nearly as bad as when Snape literally tries to attack Harry in class. That's coming in book 6, which also should be a fireable offense for a teacher, and I'm sure I will have lots to say on the subject in, 7 years when we finally get to that chapter. But again, if the adults in this series were competent, we wouldn't have a series. maybe we can skip the Riddikulus segment this time because I think I just shot my load. This all happened so that Harry would have to stay overnight in the hospital wing. And he'll do so having to regrow all the bones in his arm. Thanks, Skele-Gro. And now we interrupt this podcast for a magical word from our sponsor. Hey, Muggles and Squibs. Have a recent Quidditch spectator injury that was medically treated by an unqualified fraud? Have a racist classmate that goes out of their way to bully you? Well, do I have a product for you? Gilderoy Lockhart here with Skele-Gro. One full glass of this and you can regrow missing bones in your arm or give yourself that backbone you desperately need.
I grew 6 inches in 6 minutes. Thanks, Skele-Gro.
Skele-Gro is not really a sponsor of this podcast. Skele-Gro should not be taken unless bones are missing. Skele-Gro will not give you courage to stand up to your bullies. Skele-Gro should not be taken to enhance your experience in the bedroom. For just one long sickle and 2 knuts, you'll not only get 1 bottle of Skele-Gro, we'll give you 3 more absolutely free. Call now. And we're back. After a quick visit from the twins, full of Quidditch and shit-talking and snack food, we jump to the middle of the night. Harry wakes up in pain, obviously, because he's regrowing the bones in his arm that he didn't need to lose. Madame Pomfrey could have just flicked her wand and fixed the broken one, and he could have been on his way, but no, thanks, Lockhart. I guess he's just trying to pay for that Skele-Gro endorsement. Anyways, he wakes up in the pain, and someone's trying to give him a sponge bath, apparently. I don't know why, but it's Dobby. So welcome back, Dobby. And seemingly within seconds, Harry starts kind of piecing things together. Dobby's the one that blocked the platform to the train. And we get a nod to Dobby's home life with Dobby gets death threats 5 times a day at home, and Harry gets empathetic and curious, asking about his shitty pillowcase clothes, and we learn about the clothes rule for house elves. That might be important at some point. But our empathy is short-lived when Dobby reveals he sent the bludger after Harry that landed him here, or at least led to it. Lockhart landed him here. I'm pretty sure I'm just beating that dead unicorn with its own horn. And Dobby starts to drop hints and plots-plaining, I guess, and we ultimately get to the Chamber of Secrets was opened before. And just before Dobby can spill any more through this complete maddening refusal to just say what's going on, he has to dramatize everything with, ask no more, Harry Potter. Oh, annoying ass. But as annoying as it is, it's effective to cut the conversation short just before Dumbledore brings Colin Creevy into the hospital wing. Apparently, he had been trying to sneak up to see Harry and bring him some grapes, and he got himself petrified for his trouble. And they check his camera to see if he got a picture of the attacker, since he takes pictures of literally everything, and the camera just melts. Then the chapter ends on a giant foreshadow from Dumbledore confirming that the Chamber of Secrets has been opened again. And that wraps up our chapter, bringing us to